Guys, before I start this video, I have a confession to make. I have never played an Assassin's Creed game before. Yep, I know, sue me. I have never experienced the glory days of facing the Templars in the early Assassin's Creed trilogy or sailing the high seas in Black Flag. This franchise before playing Shadows was completely brand new to me. So what did I decide to do going into my very first Assassin's Creed game? Well, I play it for over 100 hours like a normal human being, of course. On second thought, I don't think that's exactly a flex. Anyways, the reason why I chose to play Assassin's Creed Shadows for 100 hours is so that I could get the whole entire experience of the most recent modern AAA Ubisoft title and give you guys the most unbiased analysis that I can. And if you've been paying attention to the gaming industry in any capacity within the past few months, you would know that Ubisoft hasn't been doing so well lately. Their stock prices are still in free fall despite releasing one of their most anticipated titles since Assassin's Creed Valhalla. And not only that, but their reputation has taken a massive nosedive recently because they've become the perfect embodiment of the soulless, greedy, and incompetent megacorporation that only cares about how much money they can squeeze out of their user base. Which would be fine if the games that they were releasing were actually any good. And surprise surprise, they haven't been, which is why our great and glorious savior Tencent had to step in and give them an injection of money. However, even then, in order to save Ubisoft from the financial hole that they've dug themselves into, they didn't need Assassin's Creed Shadows to be just successful, they needed it to be a miracle. So after playing 100 hours of this game, would I consider it to be the miracle that Ubisoft desperately needed, or is it another slop title used to funnel people into the Ubisoft Plus subscription service? Well, to be honest, I think that Assassin's Creed Shadows is a decent game that's ruined by the absurd amount of bloat that's artificially injected into it. If I could describe this game, I would describe it as an above average action stealth game that has about 30 hours of actual content stretched out to over 100 hours in order to keep you playing for longer. I think this game would have been way more successful if the devs weren't so dead set on creating so much manufactured friction and filler content so that they can pad out the playtime. And it's a shame too because Ubisoft have created this beautiful rendition of 1500s feudal Japan with an extremely large and visually breathtaking world that rivals Ghost of Tsushima's portrayal, maybe even slightly better. This world is probably one of Ubisoft's best technical accomplishments that they've ever done in recent times. But unfortunately, it's held back by its absolute emptiness. Whether it be 10 hours or 100 hours, my time playing this game felt the same the entire way through, and it's because they haven't really filled it with any meaningful things to do. Assassin's Creed Shadows is as wide as an ocean, but as deep as a puddle. I think that if Ubisoft reduced the scope of this project and focused more on honing in on its gameplay, its storytelling, and its world building, this would have been a much more enjoyable experience. But even when everything is on the line, their stocks are tanking and their company is on the brink of financial collapse, they still cannot help themselves. They still had to sneak in their checklist activities, they still had to put in their stupid in-game cash shop, and they still had to put in battle passes with weekly quests. I wanted to like Assassin's Creed Shadows a lot more than I did. Trust me, even though I don't like Ubisoft as a company, nor do I think that they've made a good game in many years, I was willing to give this title a fair shot because that's what I always do. However, once again, Ubisoft has let me down. Disclaimer before I get down and dirty into the review, there is going to be a lot of spoilers for the story, even though it's not very good anyway. So if you're one of those few people who actually care, then you should click off. Alright, so despite Shadows doing many things very poorly, I want to talk about the one thing that it knocks out of the park first, the world. As I mentioned earlier, the devs have created an absolutely beautiful rendition of the 1500s feudal Japan. There's just so much detail packed into the textures, the character models, and even the skyboxes. The visual fidelity of the environment alone is enough to even rival that of Ghost of Tsushima's world. However, I think Ubisoft slightly comes out on top because of their dynamic weather and season system that vastly changes how you traverse the environment. While Ghost of Tsushima does also have a dynamic weather system, I think that Shadows has a bit more depth to it because of each of the seasons bringing in their own quirks to navigate through. For example, during the winter time, some of the bodies of water are frozen, meaning that you can no longer dive under them to approach enemy encampments. It also creates snow that makes it harder to traverse through, but you can use it to hide from enemy vision as well. It's great that not only does this dynamic weather system bring new visual changes, but it also brought some gameplay changes as well, even though they're pretty minor overall. My only gripe with it is that enemies respawn after every season change, which was kinda annoying sometimes. Like, when I wanted to swap from Naoe to Yasuke, it would respawn all the enemies, which was really obnoxious because some castles were designed with either Naoe or Yasuke in mind. And when I swapped, it would respawn all the enemies that I just cleared out. Like, it's already annoying enough with respawning enemies, but to respawn when I want to swap out characters is just insulting. Although the world is very beautiful, and I commend the artist for creating such a marvelous display of feudal Japan, this is where my compliments pretty much end because everything else about this game was either incredibly mediocre or just downright awful. Like the story. Everything surrounding this game's narrative, from the writing to the characters to even the voice acting, was so atrociously bad. I refuse to believe that a studio of this size and caliber has produced one of the worst English voiceovers that I've ever listened to.
Resentment can grow quietly without much warning after a storm. Mushrooms can too. Shiitake?
And it's weird too because it's only the English voice acting that's this terrible. The Japanese voices seem to be completely unaffected by this, which means the problem lies with the English voice actors. Now you could say that was the casting that was the issue, and I would agree with you to some extent. Ubisoft probably could have casted better VAs. But I think the real problem was how they had to do the obligatory Asian accent in the English version for you to know that you're in Asia and these are Asian people. And I think it does help with the immersion to some degree. However, what also breaks the immersion is when they try too hard to sound Asian to the point where you can barely understand what they're saying and what emotions they're trying to convey.
Much honorable hellos. I am very honored to be a true samurai. Ah, my ancestors truly smile upon me honorably in my honor. Ah, the Asian character. Yeah, yes, ohayou gozaimasu.
In my opinion, it's perfectly okay to have normal speaking English voice actors that are coherent and sound good, rather than ones that can barely string together a sentence because the VA has only spoken English twice in their lifetime. Now, I'm not saying that the VAs are bad at their jobs or anything, but there's a night and day difference between the English and Japanese versions.
が去った後、知らぬ間に大きくなるのが恨みつらみだ。キノコも同じだよ。椎茸はどうだい？キノコをもっと買うかい？どんどん元気に育ってるよ。
For example, in the Japanese voice, Naoe sounds completely fine. She sounds like a normal Japanese woman in her early 20s. However, in the English voice, it sounds like she's never spoken before in her life because she's trying so hard to keep up that Japanese accent.
What are you doing up here?
Yes, I needed to clear my thoughts.
You always play your tsuchibue when you don't know what to say.
Have you been practicing your playing?
I haven't. I've been focusing on my other skills.
There are always things to improve. Do you know why I play this song?
I don't know. But I feel mother close by when you play it. 子はどこにあるんじゃ! 苦しむままに置き去りにして死に至らしめた。
うぬらには似合いの死に様よ。
お父は私に生きよと言った。以来私は復讐の念のみをよすがに生きてきたんじゃ。同じ苦しみを味わえ。
Now I am aware that other similar games do this as well, like in Ghost of Tsushima, but in that game it wasn't as bad, it was actually pretty decent. So this just seems like it's more of a Ubisoft problem than anything else. So that's the voice acting for Shadows. What about the narrative? How does it hold up? Well, it's a mess. The story is just an incoherent amalgamation of different little events that didn't make sense themselves. Like for example in the prologue where Naoi does her first mission, which is to receive the MacGuffin box that was stolen by some samurai in a castle. And once she makes it out with the box, Naoi's father all of a sudden shows up out of nowhere, somehow knowing exactly where she went in order to give her some speech. As if that wasn't weird, literally minutes later, we're introduced to the entire league of villains of the game doing a slow motion walk all lined up in unison like this was some Quentin Tarantino movie. To which they then proceed to cartoonishly take turns beating the shit out of her father in front of her. And just as they were about to finish the both of us off, the leader of the group tells them to leave us for some reason, even though there is literally zero reason to. This whole entire sequence was just so goofy that it broke all sense of immersion for me just 1 hour into it. This is a game that tries to be serious with its narrative, but it's hard to do that when it's so poorly written and nonsensical. And this is one of the better parts of the writing. The more you progress throughout the game, the worse it gets. Like in this one quest line where you have to recruit the master thief, who's like a Robin Hood type of character. His parents died when he was young due to starvation because they were too poor to afford food. So what he does now as an adult is steal rice from the rich and give it to the poor. That's his whole shtick. Eventually, once you progress through his storyline enough, you help him do a big hit on a noble's rice stash, and once you get to the rice storage, he then all of a sudden starts to get emotional out of nowhere. Then he threatens to blow himself up along with all of the rice. Yes, I'm serious. He goes from 0 to 100 out of nowhere for literally no reason at all. Who wrote this? Who thought that this was compelling character writing? This is just awful. And the thing is that none of the characters in the game really acknowledge what you did or your decisions so far in the story. Each new target that you track down has their own little quest chain that doesn't ever mention the other targets that you killed or what choices you made in those quest lines. It's just a collection of small events that are loosely related to each other. You go from one target to the next without any real progression or build-up. Everything just kinda happens until the end. Most of the time, you don't even know why you're killing these people. The only sort of explanation you get is that these guys were evil or corrupt, which is okay I guess if you're going for the less narrative focused route. But I don't think that's what the devs intended. I'm pretty sure they want a more immersive experience, which they failed miserably at. The story was so bad and so disconnected that I legitimately didn't even realize that it was over until the credits started rolling. It didn't ever feel like I was nearing the finale of the game because there was never any build up towards it. You kill the last guy like any other target, you get some cutscenes like you normally do, then it just kinda ends. They were probably setting up for a continuation in the DLC or something, but I don't think Ubisoft realized that you have to make the story actually compelling for people to want more from it, because whatever this is not it. Which leads me to my next point, that the characters in Shadows are completely dull and forgettable, especially the main duo. Obviously, since this is a huge open world RPG, there will be a bunch of characters that you'll be introduced to, all of which are about as deep as the kids pool at your local recreational center. For example, the squad mates they can recruit throughout the game literally do not show up in the story after you finish their companion quest. They don't show up in later quests, they don't influence any decisions further on in the story, and they don't have any interesting conversations. They literally just become another button for you to press on your controller. That's it. And the weirdest part is that Ubisoft are actually charging money for skins of the squad mates that you only see for 10 minutes and talk to in 3 cutscenes. And it's not just these guys that are shallow, it's pretty much everyone in this game, even the main protagonists. Because out of all the characters that should be developed and most well written, it should be them. But they're not. They're just as paper thin as the rest of the cast because they absolutely have no character development at all. They just change their viewpoints instantly the next time you see them. For example, at the beginning of the game, Naoe and Yasuke were set up to be mortal enemies because Yasuke was part of Oda Nobunaga's army that sacked Naoe's village, killing all of her friends and family. And Naoe was pretty much responsible for killing Oda herself, someone whom he greatly respected. They both have legitimate reasons to hate each other. However, the next cutscene after that, they're acting like best friends who have known each other for years. All the animosity that was held between the two was completely wiped out in the next cutscene, all because Yasuke said sorry. All the character development that happened in between these moments are totally absent. Actually, let me rephrase that. There was pretty much no character development at all in the entire game. Naoe stays the same aggressive, vengeful person, and Yasuke stays the same peaceful, honor-bound samurai throughout the entire time. The story became so insanely boring to the point where I just started to skip through the dialogue because no one ever had anything interesting to say. By the time I was halfway through the game, even going into cutscenes felt like a chore and I was just going through the motions. And while we're on the topic of characters, let's talk about Yasuke. I'm aware that a lot of people were criticizing his inclusion into this game, and it sparked a bit of controversy online. Look, I'm gonna be honest, I didn't really care all too much about Yasuke being included into Shadows. Yeah, it was kinda weird that they chose him out of any other historical Japanese samurai during that time period, but I didn't really care. I knew ever since this title was announced that Yasuke's inclusion into it was not even going to be in the top 10 things wrong with this game, because I knew that at the end of the day, this is still a modern AAA Ubi slop title. Which is sad because all I wanted was a well thought out and compelling narrative experience, but instead we got this garbage story. First of all, there is no reason for Yasuke to be in Assassin's Creed Shadows. The game would be pretty much exactly the same if they had just deleted him altogether. He just straight up doesn't provide anything unique to the storytelling because he and Naoe are supposed to be interchangeable during the cutscenes. And the reason why this doesn't work is because it prevents the writers from being able to write any deep or meaningful dialogue. They have to write the story in a way that fits either of the characters that the player could choose to play, even though they often split up and do their own thing, but somehow they still end up together at the same time in the same spot during the cutscenes. What's the point of creating a whole separate protagonist if they're not going to provide a different perspective to the narrative? It felt like Naoe was obviously supposed to be the canon protagonist of the game. I mean, she is the one that takes up the Assassin's Creed, and she is the one that the narrative is centered around. This game would be much better off if she were the only protagonist because the writers would be able to write a more compelling narrative if they knew who the player was playing as. Some people might argue that Yasuke brings a unique samurai experience to the game, and removing him will remove that gameplay style that some people enjoy. But the thing is, you can still keep the samurai gameplay, just give it to Naoe. There's actually no reason to have Yasuke in the story. He could have very well been a squad mate and the game would have still been the same. Well, maybe not, since we would be missing this banger song from Yasuke's final boss fight. The other reason why Yasuke shouldn't have been in Shadows is because he completely trivializes the entire game. Playing as Yasuke is like playing on game journalist mode, even on the hardest difficulty. To begin with, he has an absurd amount of health, which means that he can tank an incredible amount of hits and he has much more room for error. Not only that, but he does an insane amount of damage to enemies because his base DPS stats are way higher than Naoe's, often killing heavily armored NPCs in mere seconds. The only downside to playing him is that he can't climb and parkour as easily as Naoe can, which isn't really a problem if you can wipe out an entire castle with relative ease. And I understand that Ubisoft wants to provide some gameplay variety by including Yasuke, but did they have to increase all of his stats by 10x? What's the point of taking your time, scouting out and marking enemy positions, picking them off one by one until you get your target to be vulnerable, then going for the final kill? That was always the fantasy of being an assassin. You were supposed to be weak in open combat. It was supposed to feel overwhelming fighting groups of enemies. The difficulty of being this expert lone assassin is what made these types of games so enticing. But I mean, why do all of that when you could just pick the tank character and run through forts with no care in the world, two-shotting everything you see because your stats are inflated so much more than normal? I'm fine if the devs want to put in the samurai playstyle, but there's no reason to make it as broken as it is. It completely destroys the difficulty and makes playing as an assassin undesirable in an Assassin's Creed game. While we're on the topic of gameplay, why don't we talk about Assassin's Creed Shadows gameplay loop, shall we? Like any other bog standard Ubisoft game, Assassin's Creed Shadows is a massive open world RPG where you're meant to go off the beaten path, doing all the side quests, finding all the little collectibles, and clearing up every camp of bad guys. And I normally don't mind when open world games do this. I think it's fine for them to have some side activities and things to look for other than the main story. In fact, some of my favorite games of all time have some filler content within them. The problem is that in true Ubisoft fashion, they've packed Shadows with so many mundane and dull side activities to the point where it made the game feel absolutely bloated with useless time wasters that made the game feel so repetitive. For example, there are 38 strongholds, 27 shrines, 36 temples, 69 statue offerings, and so much more that I didn't bother to list out. And I know some people will argue that these are all optional and you don't have to do any of these to play the game. Well, that's not really true because you do actually have to complete a lot of the activities on the map in order to progress your characters. Like, if you want to unlock the powerful stuff higher on the skill tree, you're forced to grind out so many of the knowledge points locked behind the mind-numbingly boring side activities on the map. You want to have the ability to throw a kunai? Sure, just collect 30 different thingamabobs in 15 different places, or play the Simon Says minigame 20 times, or pray at 35 shrines because we all know it's fun to have gameplay elements locked behind hours and hours of meaningless grind. In my 100 hours of playing, I've done over 200 of these shitty little side activities, and I don't think I'm anywhere even close to finishing all of them. There's just so much busy work in this game to the point where it started to feel super repetitive just 10 hours into playing it. By that point, it already felt like I've already seen everything that Shadows has to offer, and that's because I actually did. You see, on paper, Assassin's Creed Shadows has hundreds of hours of side content and thousands of individual activities to do. And I bet Ubisoft probably boasts about how quote-unquote expansive their game world is. However, once you play the game for a couple of hours, you'll quickly realize that it's actually really shallow and there isn't really that much substance to it. Which is unfortunate because I would much rather have a smaller game with super interesting visuals than a 1,000 hour game with absolutely no variety. There's no deep hidden lore that you can find through environmental storytelling, there's no special gameplay mechanics that you can unlock by exploring, and the side quests aren't even anything interesting. There's nothing about this game that entices me to learn more about it because there's nothing past the surface level. All that you'll find even after 10 hours of playing are the exact same castles, the exact same towns, and the exact same enemies. You wanna complete an enemy fort? Well, just kill 5 samurai daishos every single time. You wanna complete a temple? Just pray at 3 different shrines. Nothing about this game ever felt unique in any single way because the vast majority of Shadows are copy and paste assets that are shifted around slightly. I really could not tell you the difference between any of the towns, castles, or regions. They're all indistinguishable from each other. I'm aware that this is supposed to be based off of real-life, historically accurate feudal Japan, but even then, you can still make unique looking environments and NPCs. There was just a severe lack of creativity here because the devs were obligated to make such a massive open world filled with random activities, and it ended up harming Shadows overall. Even the enemies you fight the entire game are exactly the same from hour 1 to hour 100. There aren't any special enemy types that you unlock as you progress throughout the story. The ones you see in the first hour are going to be exactly identical to the ones you see in the endgame, which made playing Shadows feel so excruciatingly boring. There aren't even any difficult enemy types, just reskin normal enemies with larger health bars. The guardians that are called when you're wanted are a complete joke. And that's not to mention the boss fights, if I could even call them that, because of how pathetically bad they were. These encounters made even Dragon Age the Veil Guards look like Final Fantasy XVI in comparison. Assassin's Creed Shadows by far has the worst bosses I've ever seen in a AAA title. None of them were fun to fight at all because they would either have a stupid gimmick like being only able to use guns, or they would just be a glorified normal NPC with slightly modified movesets. They even died just as fast. I mean, take a look at how quickly I killed the quote-unquote final boss of Yasuke's storyline. And the actual final boss of the game wasn't any better because I didn't even realize that this guy was supposed to be the final boss until the end credits rolled not too long after. There was never any build up towards it or any hype, it just felt like another target I gotta assassinate then move on to the next. It's not like it's impossible to make unique and interesting fights that stick within the realm of believability for this setting. There are plenty of games within the same genre and setting that still manage to create amazing boss encounters, like Rise of the Ronin, a game from a much smaller studio. So I don't believe that Ubisoft is truly incapable of doing the same. It's probably just that the project management was so horrendous that the devs couldn't sufficiently put enough time into developing decent fights. Which somehow extended to the side quests as well, because even those don't have any variation. Each one of them plays out the exact same way. You find the quest giver, they tell you about some secret organization of no-name bad guys that you have to kill, then you go out and kill them, and that's it. There isn't really any story or deep lore behind it, just kill these bad guys because they're evil or something. Who cares? The devs sure don't. And it's not like they were particularly fun to fight either, because all of the assassination targets were literally just reskinned normal enemies that sometimes had extra health. They didn't even have special movesets or behaviors. These were functionally average NPCs that you would find out in the open world. Many times I wouldn't even realize that I had just killed one of the targets until it did that special little assassination filter. There was nothing in this game that made me intrigued or spurred a little curiosity because I knew that it would just end up being the same 25th castle or 69th bandit camp. Assassin's Creed Shadows is a 20-hour game that's artificially stretched out over to 100 hours, and it killed all of my enjoyment with it. And I think a lot of why Shadows was so bloated is because of Ubisoft's annoying fixation on forcing their stupid hideout system. That one thing they were so proud of that they made a whole ass tutorial for it on their website. And I guess it is a pretty cool system if you're one of those players who likes building sims or you're a filthy casual. Look, I don't have a problem with this type of stuff being in the game. In fact, I generally even encourage devs to put in extra side content to make their titles more fleshed out. But unfortunately, I don't think that the hideout system is fleshed out enough, and a lot of it felt pretty useless. Which sucks because a lot of the game is designed around funneling all your resources into it. It might look awesome that every castle, stronghold, and every bandit camp is filled with quote-unquote loot at first. However, once you actually tackle them, you'll realize that 95% of the pickups that litter throughout them are just useless crafting materials and decorations. Because isn't it just fun to clear out an entire section of a castle only to collect 15 wood and a lamp for your hideout? Thanks Ubisoft, that's what I really wanted. And the thing is, I wouldn't have a problem with the loot pool being absolutely bloated with crafting materials if there were a lot more gameplay functionality options from the hideout. As it stands now, it's just a glorified passive buff generator where you might sometimes use the blacksmith to upgrade your gear. But most of the time, that's pointless because you can just quickly find better gear out in the open world anyway. What also confused me was just how little resources you actually need to fully upgrade your hideout, because I pretty much maxed every building and had every passive bonus about 25 hours into the game. After that, I had nothing else to spend my resources on other than decorations, making all the crafting materials littered throughout the world completely pointless. Could they really not add any other way to dump your resources? As it stands now, it's an extremely shallow addition to the game and for the most part, useless, but I guess that's to be expected for a modern day Ubisoft title. Anyways, speaking of shallowness, why don't I talk about the gameplay for Assassin's Creed Shadows? You know, the one thing that this franchise has prided itself upon? Yeah, well, the combat isn't all that great either. Don't get me wrong, it looks cool for about the first 10 hours of the game, then after that, you'll quickly realize that there's very little substance to be had here because you'll be doing the exact same thing from hour 1 to hour 100. There are no new enemy types that you'll unlock later in the game. The enemies you fight at level 1 are identical to the ones you'll be fighting at max level. And even the way you fight them will be exactly the same. You just spam your charged attack to break their guard while occasionally using an ability to pretty much one-shot any NPC. The combat is incredibly easy, even on the hardest difficulty where the enemies can kill Naue in 3 hits because the enemy AI is just not advanced enough. Most of them only have one attack that they can do and will instantly die after a couple of hits, and if you're playing Yasuke, most of the time it's just 2 hits. It's incredibly simple to the point where I could just turn off my brain and still wipe out an entire castle without any care in the world because none of the enemies are really threatening. And if you somehow were in danger of dying, you could just simply cheese the enemy AI by climbing onto a rooftop and laying there until you drop aggro because they're that stupid. I get the Shadows was probably made with the intention of catering towards casuals who spend like 2 hours a week playing games, but even then you can still create engaging combat mechanics without having it feel repetitive. Now to be fair, you do unlock some skills as you level up and get stronger, and I will admit that some of them are kinda cool, but the thing is that you can only use 3 of them at a time per weapon, which is really odd considering how there weren't that many skills on the skill tree to begin with. There are like 3 that you could pick from each weapon tree, and 2 options from the general tree, and not only that, but each of the skills are locked to specific buttons. So not only can you only just use 3 skills at a time, but you can even assign them to any slot you want, making the system feel way too restrictive for seemingly no reason at all. Like, I get what the devs were going for here, and there were some interesting ideas within the skill tree, but it was just so undercooked and so bare bones to the point where you can pretty much get everything you want within the first 20 hours of the game. Now, I can't really mention the combat without talking about the loot because it's still an RPG after all. And to be fair, it's alright, a bit better than a lot of AAA slop games in recent times, but it's still not that interesting. You see, as you play the game and open chests, you'll receive plenty of loot that you can equip onto either Naue or Yasuke. And as your generic common to legendary rarity system, with legendaries having unique gameplay modifiers, allowing you to create your own builds, you know, the usual stuff. However, the problem is that for a vast majority of the game, you're not really going to be build crafting because by the time you figure out a build that you want to play, your gear will be outclassed by a random blue item because it's 1 level higher. Sure, each piece of gear will have their own randomized stats that in theory you would have to consider when swapping. But in reality, the only stat that really matters is DPS. All the other ones are just fluff to make the game seem like it's deeper than it really is. Like if you removed every other stat and just had DPS, nothing about the gameplay would change. You would still press the same buttons in the same exact way. You might as well just have a couple of weapon types that you can choose to upgrade as you progress throughout the game. Because the whole entire purpose of a loot system is to give the player the freedom to choose whatever weapon and armor combination they want. But you can't do that in Shadows because each of the characters are restricted to certain types of gear, completely killing the purpose of a loot system. There is absolutely no reason to have one in this game, and nothing would have changed if they had just deleted the whole entire thing. I don't know what it is with AAA corporate suits thinking that players love generic and pointless loot systems in games where they have no business being in, but at this point it's becoming an epidemic and we need to stop it. Now, I'm aware that games are hard to make, and sometimes bugs, glitches, or unintended interactions might go under the radar, especially for a game of this size and scope. Generally, I can forgive a few oversights because I know how difficult it is to release a title completely free of any hiccups. But AC Shadows is so egregiously bad with its user experience quality of life that I just could not ignore it. There are so many little inconveniences in this game that have such easy solutions to them that would be no-brainers in any other title, but in this one, they're missing for some reason. I want to say that the devs intentionally made the quality of life terrible for malicious reasons, but what would be the gain here? There wouldn't be any. This is just incompetence and lack of foresight. For example, remember earlier how we talked about this game's day-night and 4-season cycle? Well, it is cool and all, but there are some quests that only spawn the objective during certain seasons or certain times of day. But the thing is that you can't skip time like in any other open world game. You have to wait in real time for the in-game clock to pass by and change seasons or change time of day. Was there nobody in the office over at Ubisoft who thought to themselves, maybe the players might want an option to skip time like in literally any other game? But nah, who cares about that? So anyway, about those microtransactions, and this isn't even the only quality of life issue, another one is with the questboard UI. Look, I get that the devs wanted to do some avant-garde artsy stuff with this, and don't get me wrong, it looks cool, but it is such a pain in the ass to navigate because you have to manually move your crosshair over each quest objective in order to figure out which ones you need to do. There isn't any sort of journal that neatly lists out all of your active quests that you have going on, because who cares about the user experience, am I right? As long as it looks cool, we don't need to think about how practical it is. So if you're a player like me who likes to do every side quest, then you're gonna have to repeatedly scroll through each little quest circle to make sure you're doing the right one or you didn't miss anything. And the funniest part is that it doesn't even tell you whether or not you fully completed the whole quest chain. You just have to assume that you did because there aren't any objectives left. There were also some other minor inconveniences with the UI, like in the shop where there's no option to sell all of your unwanted gear. So you'll have to press and hold for each individual piece that you want to sell. Same with the scouts where you have to press and hold to get back one at a time, instead of, refilling all of your scouts at once. It's oversights on basic stuff like this that makes me ponder if the UI designers ever even made a video game before, because how can this make it past Q&A without anyone thinking that this was absolutely obnoxious? Oh, that's right, nobody thought of this because there's probably so much corporate red tape that would be too much of a hassle to do, but that's a conversation for another time. And finally, the nail in the coffin that put me off from Assassin's Creed Shadows was the microtransactions, because of course it needed some. I mean, how else are they gonna pay the salaries of 19,000 employees? It's not like the production of this game was completely and unnecessarily bloated for no reason at all. What, the end credits are 2 hours long? That's completely normal for a quadruple A game of this caliber, so microtransactions are entirely necessary for this title. It's even got everything you want, skins, weapons, and even time savers. Because don't we all love entirely fabricated problems that the developers intentionally designed to be frustrating so that they can sell you the solution? I mean, who wants to waste time exploring the world discovering all the points of interest when you could just spend $10 and uncover them all? And if you don't want to grind for resources, you can just buy them because we're all busy adults with responsibilities, so we don't have time to play the game that we bought. And it's already one thing to put in a cash shop on top of already charging people $70 to $130, but it's also another to design this single player title like it's a live service. Because it also includes battle passes, weeklies, and radiant quests. Why on God's green earth does a single player title need all three of these? I'll tell you why. It's because they want you to perpetually keep playing this game forever so that they can squeeze out the most money out of you. I've already explained this in detail in my previous video, but to sum it up, the reason why they've implemented all of these mobile game mechanics is because it's not intended for you to pay the full $70 to $130 for the game. You're meant to play it through the Ubisoft Plus subscription service. AC Shadows is not meant to be a game that you pick up and put down once you're done. It's meant for you to pick up and keep coming back week after week after week. This is meant to be a forever game disguised as a temporary game in order to keep you subscribed for as long as they can keep you, and that is a problem. I know some people will argue that you can completely ignore the cash shop and it won't affect anything, but the thing is, it does affect the game. The entirety of AC Shadows was intentionally designed to be tedious and repetitive in order to funnel you into the cash shop. They wanted you to spend more time taking pictures, picking flowers, or slow walking through fields because then you're more likely to give them more money. It may not seem like it affects you personally, but I can assure you, it's affecting everybody. That's why stuff like this is a cancer to the gaming industry and we need to vote with our wallets, or else it'll continue to fester and infect other games. Anyways, to sum it all up, Assassin's Creed Shadows was supposed to be Ubisoft's last line of defense. It was supposed to be their savior in these trying times. We all know how bad the Ubisoft stocks have been recently. We all know that they've had to lay off hundreds of employees. They didn't need this game to just be successful, they needed this game to be a miracle. But a miracle it was not. In fact, it had no chance to ever be that because Assassin's Creed Shadows is a poor man's imitation of Ghost of Tsushima. The writing is terrible, the English voice acting is some of the worst I've ever heard from a AAA studio, the gameplay is shallow, the world is extremely bloated with so much repetitive content, the user experience is an afterthought, and worst of all, the game was built like it was trying to be a live service instead of just a good single player title. I wanted to be relatively neutral coming into this game because I wanted to give it a fair shot, basically withholding my judgment for it until after I've given it a fair shake. And I think I've given it more than enough of my time that I can never get back. If you want to play a similar game in a similar setting that's in way better quality, just play Ghost of Tsushima or even Rise of the Ronin. Those are infinitely better games that respect your time as a player and don't try to squeeze out every last bit of retention from you by adding so much BS. That is what I think of Assassin's Creed Shadows after playing it for 100 hours.